It was a routine morning flight, but just 2 minutes before landing, the cockpit started blaring with warnings. This is a story of flight where not following standard operating procedures and not reacting to warnings as trained every year leads the aircraft in an unwanted, unacceptable position. Air Niugini Limited is the flag carrier of Papua New Guinea, established in November 1973. It operates a fleet of 22 aircrafts as of 2023. Flight PX-073, operated by Air Niugini Limited, was scheduled between Phnom Penh to Chuuk, in the Federated States of Micronesia. It was flown by Boeing 737-800 aircraft registered P2PXE. This aircraft had accumulated a total of approximate 37,000 airframe hours fitted with 2 CFM56 engines. It had 2 pilots and 6 cabin crews and a loadmaster. An engineer was also present on the flight, occupying a jump seat in the cockpit. The engineer, for recreational purposes, recorded the video of landing from 3,000 feet till the point of accident on a smartphone, which later turned out an important evidence for the accident investigation. The flight was quite empty, with just 35 passengers on board. The crew requested for 13,800 kilograms of fuel to be loaded in the aircraft. The cockpit crew consisted of a captain who has over 19,000 flight hours experience with over 2,000 hours on Boeing 737 aircraft as a captain. On the other hand, the first officer had over 4,500 hours overall experience with all hours flown on Boeing 737 aircraft. The flight was scheduled to depart at time 21:50 UTC. It took off from Phnom Penh at time 22:22 UTC. Flight PX-073 was scheduled to land at Chuuk International Airport, which has one runway named 0422, with a magnetic bearing of 041 degrees and 221 degrees, an elevation of 10 feet above mean sea level. The runway length was 6,006 feet with a width of 150 feet. The flight time was approximately 1 hour. The initial climb out was smooth. They climbed up to an altitude of 40,000 feet, with the flight being very routine. The co-pilot contacted Chuuk Radio at 23:08 and requested a weather update for landing at Chuuk. Chuuk Radio contacted the crew with the weather update for Chuuk, stating, wind variable at 5, visibility 14, scattered 0, 12 Charlie Bravo, broken 1, 20 overcast 280, temperature 26, dew point 25, altimeter 2973 inch. Meaning winds were blowing from variable directions. Speed of 5 knots with visibility of 14 statute miles. Cumulonimbus clouds at 1,200 feet. Broken clouds at 12,000 feet. Overcast clouds at 28,000 feet. Temperature 26 degrees Celsius. There were 2 things about this reported weather that was of utmost importance. There were cumulonimbus clouds at 1,200 feet, scattered around the airport, which indicates rain and turbulence. The second thing was that since the temperature and dew point were just 1 Celsius degree apart, that indicated possibility of rain. The pilots then commenced a discussion about the landing flap setting. The co-pilot asked the captain if they should use flaps 30, and the captain replied saying, yeah, flaps 30 would do. They further continued their discussion whether to use flaps 30 or 40 for landing, as using flaps 40 lets the aircraft stop quickly on the runway after landing compared to flaps 30 because of lower approach speed during landing. The co-pilot then entered the data in the Boeing onboard performance tool, known as OPT, to calculate the landing distance required to stop the aircraft. It turned out to be that landing with flaps 40 will result in a shorter landing distance to stop by approximately 500 feet. The captain agreed to this, and they decided to land with flaps 40. The crew requested Chuuk Air Traffic Control to do the approach for runway 04 from east-southeast. They then selected the GPS approach for runway 04 via a waypoint MICNO in the flight management computer of the aircraft. They then discussed the approach and missed approach procedure into runway 04 at Chuuk Airport. However, the approach briefing for the approach chart were not conducted in accordance with the Air Niugini's standard operating procedures and standard phraseologies. The approach for runway 04 specified an expected descent rate of 743 feet per minute at a ground speed of 140 knots to Maintain a constant 3-degree descent angle, glide slope, for landing. They plan to join the arrival at waypoint Mikno, then continuing to initial approach fix at Kavri, further to intermediate fix at Figbai at an altitude of 2500, then joining the final approach track off 041 degrees to waypoint Faspo at 1700 feet. This approach had a missed approach point named Hamax, where if they did not saw the runway, they should have done a go-around. The crew commenced their descent, leaving 40,000 feet at time 22:56. At a descent rate of approximately 950 feet per minute. At 34,000 feet, the co-pilot contacted San Francisco Air Traffic Controller and reported that they were maintaining 34,000 feet. ATC cleared them to descent further to 18,000 feet. The aircraft was fitted with a navigation system known as Integrated Approach Navigation System that provides a display similar to an instrument landing system and allows the flight crew to fly a non-precision approach with the guidance like a precision approach. Since they were doing a non-precision approach for runway 0, this provided the flight crew with additional guidance by the glide slope indicator on their primary flight displays about their descent path on final approach. Since Chuuk Airport was uncontrolled airport without air traffic control below 5,500 feet. At about 15 nautical miles from Chuuk while passing 8,600 feet. The co-pilot made a broadcast to other aircraft on CTAF known as Common Traffic Advisory Frequency, stating their intention to land on runway 04. They commenced their approach into runway 04 from waypoint named Mikno. Everything was going pretty well until now, but soon things will take a turn very quickly in no time. At time 23:21, the aircraft started taking the final turn to align with the runway, and the co-pilot made a broadcast on CTAF stating that they were established on 041 degrees inbound for runway 04. As they approached closer to the runway, the co-pilot mentioned to the captain that there were some showers in the area, and the captain acknowledged by stating, "That must be some storm, but it'll be out soon." The pilots knew the weather was bad near the airport as they saw that on their navigation display. As they approached closer to the runway, they started to configure the aircraft for landing. The captain called for gear down and flaps 15. After a few seconds, captain said, "All right, flaps 30, flaps 40, landing checks," and they reduced the speed for the landing. At 1,700 feet, they crossed the final approach fix Faspo with the autopilot engaged. At the GPW's 1,000 feet call out, the co-pilot told the captain, "Okay, stable." Later, the captain said, "Continue," and asked to switch on the wipers. When passing 548 feet on descent, the captain disengaged the autopilot. The aircraft entered the storm cell and heavy rain, which was clearly seen on the navigation display by red color. The aircraft started descending at excessively high rate, and the captain over controlling the aircraft laterally. The aircraft crossed minimum descent altitude with a descent rate of 1,490 feet per min. Sink rate warnings started blaring in the cockpit. Captain said, reacting to the warnings, "That's fine. I'll just go a little bit more." At 100 feet, they still continued, captain being fixated to land the aircraft. Just before impact, co-pilot said,
"We are too low."
But that was far little too late, as the aircraft impacted the ground 1,500 feet before the start of the runway 04. The aircraft was destroyed by impact forces and submersion into the lagoon. Crew members and surviving 34 passengers exited the aircraft and were promptly rescued and brought to shore by Chuuk state government boats. Red Cross Transco, more than 20 privately owned boats, and U.S. Navy divers, who were first on scene after the accident. Until 2 seconds before impact, the co-pilot did not give the captain any oral cautions throughout the approach. Despite the excessively high rate of descent and the aircraft increasingly being flown below the approach path in an unstabilized manner, as the pilot monitoring the co-pilot did not challenge the captain as required in the Air Niugini limited procedures. The co-pilot did not provide effective monitoring and operational support to the captain and did not recognize the unstable approach. The evidence showed that he was unaware of the developing unsafe conditions. Due to his lack of situational awareness and vigilance, he was unable to recognize the need to correct the ever-increasing dangerous rate of descent below the flight path. The co-pilot used an unapproved Boeing OPT tool, which was not authorized to Air Niugini to be used in flight. The same crew on a flight into Pohnpei on September 27th, they received 28 GPWS warnings, which was disregarded by them. As about the captain, he was fixated to land even after 13 ground proximity warnings and an unstabilized approach. The crew disregarded all oral warnings and continued the unstable approach at an excessive rate of descent to the time of impact. We should never blame anyone for the mistake, but learn from their mistakes. We should always follow the standard operating procedures laid down by airlines because they are made for a reason. That reason can be the difference between life and death.